Hello everybody, welcome back to UK Gaming Network. I'm Brian, also known as UKGN Zoidberg, and this is part 2 of my ranking of all games based on movies that I have played on the Commodore Amiga. If you watched part 1, then you will have seen me rank 39 of them already. In this episode, we've got 37 more to go through. As always, I'll be ranking the games in one of the 5 categories that you can see on screen now of essential, recommended, good, poor or rubbish. And as with every previous episode of this series, this is purely my opinion. If you disagree with any of my rankings, please do let me know what yours are in the comments. So without further ado, let's get on to the first game. So first up we have Jaws the computer game, which came out in 1989, published by Screen 7 and developed by Intelligent Design. And over the years there have been many attempts to make video games based on Jaws, and one day somebody will realise that it's never really going to be that good of an idea, although this one is actually better than most. At least in this one you don't actually control the shark, and instead you get to patrol the seas of Amity Island in your boat. Unfortunately, using the map screen seems to be completely incidental, as no matter where I stopped in the water and used the submarine, the shark would always appear. And the underwater sections themselves become some bizarre flip screen shooter where you can shoot in 4 directions, but unfortunately the developers forgot to make them fun. So I think I'm going to start by putting this into the poor category. Next up we have The Jungle Book, which came out in 1989 from Cocktail Vision. And this is a mildly diverting Disney adaptation with really good presentation, where all the major characters from the movie are instantly recognisable. Unfortunately, the game gives no guidance whatsoever as to what you're meant to be doing, so you end up wandering aimlessly around throwing fruit at the wildlife. The fact that the game is presented as though it's on a cinema screen, with audience members falling asleep each time you lose a life, is probably the closest thing that this game has to an interesting idea. As once again, I don't really think I can put this anywhere other than the poor category. And I think I probably will put this one below Jaws. Next up we have Jurassic Park, which came out in 1993, published by Ocean Software and designed by Warren Lancashire. And this is a flawed but really entertaining overhead shooter with some nice presentation and plenty of dinosaur action. The lack of an in-game map, however, means that you either have to make your own or have a really good memory, as a lot of the scenery is pretty much identical. This is one of those annoying games where the scrolling is actually slower than your character moves, so you keep having to stop moving in order to return yourself to the centre of the screen. And the amount of ammo that you get from collectibles is usually pretty scarce, so running away from dinosaurs is usually your best approach. This is definitely entertaining enough to go in the good category, so that's where I'm going to put it. I am including Jurassic Park in this list twice because the A1200 version offered a significantly different approach to the game. Basically everything that I just said about the A500 version also applies to this one. But it makes really good use of the extra colours that are provided by being on the A1200. The reason that it's getting an additional entry though is the inclusion of some brilliant and intense first person sections. Music in these sections is used to ramp up the tension. Each time you enter a room where there's going to be a dinosaur, the music will change accordingly. And I can still remember to this day the first time that I ever came under attack by a raptor when I played this on release, and I probably jumped more at that than I have in any other game I've ever played. Sadly though, these sections are all too brief, but they do make the A1200 version a much easier recommendation, so I am going to put this one in the recommended category. So if you have an A1200, play it. If you don't, still play it, but keep your expectations lower. Next we have The Karate Kid Part 2, which came out in 1987, developed by Steve Back, who has actually turned out to be much more prolific than I originally thought. This is one of those games where you need to look past the terrible graphics, which haven't really aged that well, because you actually have a pretty enjoyable karate game in the same vein as Way of the Exploding Fist or International Karate off 8-bit machines. The controls are responsive, with a nice selection of moves at your disposal. Between some of the levels you get mini games where you have to catch flies with chopsticks or break ice blocks by waggling the joystick, and they do break up the action quite nicely. And I don't think it's quite good enough to go in the recommended category, but it's definitely going in the good category. And I think I'm going to put this one below Jurassic Park. Next up we have Last Action Hero, which came out in 1994, developed by the Dome and published by Psygnosis. And when you know how poor a lot of the belt-scrolling brawlers on the Amiga are, to say that this one is the worst of them all is quite an achievement. If you try to play the game properly, you will just simply fail. Instead, simply just stand still and hold the fire button and you'll have much more success. And if you do that, the game will even walk you to the next encounter automatically, so you don't even have to touch the joystick. The appalling music that accompanies the action is just a 10-second loop that begins to grate almost immediately and unfortunately can't be switched off. So whereas the film of Last Action Hero is a misunderstood classic, in my opinion, the game is absolutely a big pile of steaming rubbish, so it's going right down at the bottom. Next up we have Lethal Weapon, which came out in 1992, developed by Mick West and published by Ocean Software. Considering that the success of the film series that this one is based on is down to the chemistry of the two main characters, the fact that there's no two-player option in this game really feels like a missed opportunity. What you're left with, though, is an enjoyable action platform game where you can switch the characters every time you go back to the police station between levels. Ultimately, though, the lack of variety stops it from being recommended rather than merely good. But you'll definitely have fun playing this one, but I am going to put this one at the top of the good category. Next we have License to Kill, which came out in 1989, published by Domark and developed by Quixel. And this continued Domark's tradition of making lazy and boring games based on the James Bond films, as this one is yet another collection of poor shooting minigames. The opening section with the helicopter is far too difficult in my opinion, and if you do manage to get past it, the next stage is even worse. Having to constantly stop running and change the angle of your fire before moving made these on-foot sections incredibly tedious. At least the graphics and sound are of an okay quality, but that's not really saying much, is it? This is definitely in the poor category, and I think I'm going to put this one below the Jungle Book. Next we come to The Lion King, which came out in 1994, published by Virgin Interactive and developed by Dave Semmons at Disney Interactive. And this is a game that's pretty notorious for its difficulty, whereas as far as I'm concerned it should actually be remembered for not being very good. In an ideal world, the developers would have put as much effort into the level design and the gameplay itself, as they clearly did into all the presentation, as the graphics and sound and music in this one are all of a really high quality. I just find it really boring to play, as the levels just aren't fun to explore and it's all painfully linear. I don't think it's quite bad enough to go into the poor category though, because of how good the presentation is, so I am going to stick this one in good, and I think I'm going to put it just above the Karate Kid Part 2. Next up we have Live and Let Die, which came out in 1989, published by Domark, but this one was actually developed by Elite Systems. And this is a clear example of a game existing before the publisher slapped a license on it. In the US, it's even just called Aquablast and has nothing to do whatsoever with James Bond. And in the game, there's almost nothing linking this to the movie that it shares its title with, bar the James Bond theme on the title screen. Basically, it's a water-based variation on Elite's Overlander, with a little bit of Buggy Boy thrown in for good measure. Can be quite good fun in small doses. and there's a nice variety between the levels that it offers when you first load the game up, and the fact that it gives you a choice as to which one of 4 you want to play is also a nice touch. So this one's actually going to go in the good category. Just don't go expecting it to be a live and let die game. So I am going to put this one above Jurassic Park. Next up we have Moonwalker, which came out in 1989, developed by Emerald Software and published by US Gold. And this is one of many games available that carry the name of Michael Jackson's 1988 movie, which did include an excellent arcade game from Sega. Sadly, what we got on the Amiga was a slow and tedious maze game accompanied by one of the most recognisable riffs in popular music. What cripples it completely as a game, though, is being returned to the start of the level every time you die, making you slog back to where you were, and the fact that it's also painfully slow. The graphics on the final level are actually quite good, and if you haven't strained your eyes or died of boredom before then, that part is worth a look, and that's probably what stops it from being right down in the rubbish category. So I am going to put this one in poor, and I think I'm going to put this one just below License to Kill. Next up we have Navy Seals, which came out in 1990, developed by Bobby Earl and published by Ocean Software. And if you've not seen Navy Seals, good on you, as it is a really terrible action movie, although it actually got a surprisingly good game adaptation. Good job, hardly anybody remembers the film, unless you're a Kevin Smith fan. There's more to this game than just being a straight platformer, as you can actually die from a single bullet. So that means that you have to carefully make your way around the levels, although the time limits that it gives you to do them are actually pretty strict. I think it's got some great graphics and it offers a really enjoyable challenge, despite the relatively small number of levels. So I think this one's definitely going in the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one just below Lethal Weapon. Next up we have the NeverEnding Story Part 2, which came out in 1990 from French developer Linel. And this is another title that tries to inject longevity by offering multiple different game styles for each of the levels that you come to. This naturally means that it's a really mixed bag of quality. The 3D level is nice, but all too brief, but the opening level is one of the worst, so not a lot of players will actually see past it and get to the rest of the game. I gave this 2 stars in my original Games X review, and to be honest, that's probably a little bit generous. Turns out that the story does end because I turned it off, never to be played again. So I am going to put this one in the rubbish category, but it's definitely better than Last Action Hero. Next we come to the first of 2 games based on Clive Barker's Nightbreed, both released in 1990 and published by Ocean Software. So for the action game, you got some truly awful visuals, and they will have you questioning whether or not you should be playing this from the moment that you press the start button. Almost everything in the game is some shade of brown, and consequently everything blends into one and you can't really see what's going on. Even if you do allow your eyes to adjust to it though, there's a shocker of a game here with really bad controls, terrible overall design and unfair difficulty. So I am going to drop this one into the rubbish category as well, and I think I'm going to put this one below NeverEnding Story Part 2. Then there was also the interactive movie that came out the same year, and this is another game that I actually got with my Amiga, and so I consequently played it a lot more than I probably would have done otherwise. The presentation is fairly nice, and it gets points for being different to the usual movie tie-in formula. There isn't really much of an adventure here though, as any wrong decision that you make usually leads to instant death and you having to restart the game from the beginning, which is never a good thing. So I don't think it's quite bad enough for the rubbish category, but I also can't put it any higher than poor. But I think it's better than all the games that are in there already. Next up we have Oliver and Company, which came out in 1989, and once again, just like the Jungle Book, this is developed by Cocktail Vision. And this comes from a time when any game based on a Disney movie was seemingly aimed squarely at kids, with almost nothing in it for adults. It means that there's almost nothing here for anyone whose age is in double figures, but this one might actually keep a preschooler entertained for more than a few minutes. The presentation throughout is excellent though, with bright, colourful graphics and instantly recognisable characters from the movie. It's just a shame that the gameplay is so basic. I don't think I can drop this below the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one below The Lion King. Next up we have Plan 9 from Outer Space, which came out in 1992, developed and published by Gremlin. And I don't know why somebody thought that a game based on the self-proclaimed worst movie of all time, which has probably recently had its title taken by Madam Web, but I don't know who thought that was a good idea. At least they did actually come up with an interesting hook though, even if the game itself isn't as deep or clever as it likes to think it is. Solving the game's mystery can be entertaining for a couple of hours, but it's probably no more than that, and you'll probably end up forgetting about the game just as quickly as it took to finish. It at least manages to capture the look of the movie quite nicely. When you bought this one back in the day, you actually got a VHS tape with the movie on it. Not that that was a good thing. I don't think it's definitely not bad enough for the poor category, so I'm going to put this one in the good, but I think I'm going to put this one just above Oliver and Company. Next up we have Platoon, which came out in 1988, published by Ocean Software and developed by Choice. This is an almost pixel perfect conversion of the 8-bit game that appeared on the Commodore 64 and Spectrum. Doesn't really feel like an Amiga game at all. It just simply has a few more colours on screen and that's it. At least you can actually now see the tripwires in the jungle though, thanks to those extra colours. It's extremely challenging, almost to the point of where you have to question if it's too hard. And if you do manage to get to them, the tunnel levels are definitely the highlight of the game. And to be honest, they are worth persevering to get to. But I think if you're going to play this game, then you should probably just stick to playing the 8-bit version rather than this one. So that's going to drop it down into the poor category. And I think I'm going to put this one just below Nightbreed. Next up we have Predator, which came out in 1989, published by Activision and developed by Source. And this is, like Platoon, another almost direct conversion of the game from the 8-bit systems. Sadly though, in this case, the game was never that good to begin with, and the result is something that feels even worse on the 16-bit systems. I found it really annoying that the enemies could start shooting at you before they've even appeared on screen. Which is surely some unfair game design. At least the character's running animation is nice and smooth, but to be perfectly honest, it's hard to be impressed with the parallax scrolling on the Amiga as we were on the Spectrum. And this one is going to go right down in the rubbish category, I think, because I don't really see any point in playing this one. But I'm going to put it at the top of the rubbish. Next up is Predator 2, which came out in 1991, published by Imageworks this time and developed by Arc Development. And I remember quite enjoying this crosshair shooter back when I first played it, but playing it today, I can't for the life of me understand why. Graphics are quite nice, although they do slow down horrendously when there are too many characters on screen. I found it really annoying that shooting one of the civilians that wanders across can end the game immediately, no matter where you are, and that became really infuriating. So yes, as crosshair shooters go, this is pretty terrible, but it is marginally less terrible than Die Hard 2 was, but it's still going in the rubbish category. And I think I would rather play this one than the first Predator game. Next we have Rambo 3, which came out in 1989, once again published by Ocean Software. This one was developed by Mark K. Jones. And this sees Stallone's unstoppable killing machine returning for a third outing. Although sadly, Ocean seemed to forget everything that made the great Spectrum game based on Part 2 so enjoyable. Rambo himself moves with all the urgency of somebody out for an afternoon Sunday stroll. But I did find it quite amusing that Rambo is so good at killing that enemies die simply by walking into him. The third level, though, which is a straight Operation Thunderbolt ripoff, is actually pretty entertaining, but having to slog through the previous two games to get there might be too much for some people. Apparently this is licensed from a Taito arcade game, but the only arcade game that I can remember looked nothing like this, so take that with a pinch of salt. I think the third section of the game is actually what keeps it out of the rubbish category, so this is going in poor, and I think I'm going to put it just above Jaws. Next up we have Red Heat, which came out in 1989, developed by Special FX and published by Ocean Software. And this is a side-scrolling brawler in the style of Kung Fu Master, or at least it is in theory. In execution, it's nothing like it. The sprites themselves are so huge that you never get to see their legs, and although you have other moves, you'll only ever use the punch. It's mind-numbingly repetitive, and it's never clear whether you've picked up any of the energy collectibles or not. But hey, at least the character actually looks like Arnie in this one, and the animated Jim Belushi between levels did make me chuckle, but not enough for me to say that you should play it. This is going to go in the rubbish category for sure, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Last Action Hero. Now we come to Return of the Jedi, which came out in 1988, developed by Consult Computer Systems and published by Domark. And to this day, I can't understand why Atari didn't complete their arcade trilogy with another wireframe shooter instead of this annoying isometric one that they gave us instead. Even in the arcades, it's not a particularly good game, but at least it doesn't look anywhere near as bad as this conversion does, which is quite clearly a straight port from the Atari ST. Whether you're controlling a speeder bike, Scout Walker or the Millennium Falcon, you can never see far enough ahead of you to move at speed. It is neat how the second stage, when you get to the high difficulties, flips between the space battles and the forest fight, just like the film does. That's probably the only thing of note in the entire game. This is definitely poor for me, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Rambo 3. Now we come to RoboCop, which came out in 1989, developed by Peter Johnson and published by Ocean Software. And if you want to understand why there are so many film licensed games, look no further than this one, which was apparently the best-selling game of the 1980s here in the UK. So quite clearly all other publishers wanted a little bit of that. This is partly based on the Data East arcade game, with some typical Ocean-style mini-games inserted between the levels. It's a decent enough game, I suppose, but it's a shame that very little effort seems to have gone into improving it over the 8-bit versions. And this is another game that is quite clearly a direct conversion from the Atari ST. Do I put this one in the good category or recommended? I think I'm going to stick it in good, and I think I'm going to put it between Lethal Weapon and Navy Seals. Now we come to RoboCop 2, which came out the following year. This one is developed by Special FX, once again published by Ocean. And this feels much more like an Amiga game, as it's much better looking and far smoother than the previous game. I want to like it a lot more than I do though, as the action is frantic and enjoyable, but there are lots of silly design decisions that ruin it. Enemies will constantly respawn, controls are really fiddly, and it returns you to the start of the level when you die. Worst of all though, it has negative power-ups, such as reverse controls, and those only serve to make it even more frustrating than it should be. With even just 2 of those things ironed out, this probably would have been in the recommended category. So instead, I'm going to put it in good, and I think I'm going to put it just above the original RoboCop. Next up, we have RoboCop 3, which came out in 1992, developed by Digital Image Design. I actually did a full re-review episode about this one, so if you want a more in-depth look at what I think about it, then you should go and watch that, and I'll make sure that I put the link on screen. It's a game that, had I rated this in 1992, would be an instant essential, and it is such a bold attempt to do something different with a movie license. It's easy to see why the gaming press, myself included, were so impressed with it at the time of release. It hasn't really aged all that well though. The 3D graphics are still good, and they run more smoothly based on the hardware that you're running it on, but the gameplay isn't actually that great. And the final two sections, where you fly around on a jetpack and indulge in a bit of one-on-one fighting, are truly appalling by today's standards. There is enough here to recommend playing it, but no more than that. So I am going to stick this one in the recommended category, and I think I am going to put it above the A1200 version of Jurassic Park.
I'll be back.
Next up, we have The Running Man, which came out in 1989, developed by Emerald Software and published by Grand Slam. And there is some surprisingly decent presentation in this one, which kicks off an otherwise extremely forgettable platform and beat-em-up hybrid. The central sprite is large and well animated, and it bears some similarity to Arnold Schwarzenegger. And there's also some good parallax scrolling, but the gameplay itself is absolutely horrific. It has unresponsive controls, instant death fails, and the fact that you start the opening level kicking dogs all but stop you from wanting to play it. So this is going to go in the rubbish category. There's quite a lot of Arnie games in there. This is going to go above Nightbreed, I think. Next we come to The Spy Who Loved Me, which came out in 1990, developed by The Kremlin and published by Domark. I think it's safe to say that Midway's Spy Hunter is already heavily influenced by the Lotus chase from this film, so it makes sense that Domark used it as a template for easily their best James Bond game. It's another game, however, that suffers from extreme difficulty right off the bat. The opening level should ease you in, but this one I found to be overly punishing. It's a real shame too, as the controls work nicely and the graphics are excellent. If you do manage to survive the first section, you'll get a lot more enjoyment out of the game overall, and the upward scrolling shooting section is really good. So this is going to go in the good category for sure. So like I say, it's definitely better than Live and Let Die, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Navy Seals. Next up we have Star Wars, which came out in 1988, published by Domark and developed by Jürgen Friedrich. And this is a fantastic conversion of a fantastic and timeless arcade game from Atari. Feels absolutely perfect to play this one with the mouse. You could argue, if you're wanting to nitpick, that it gets repetitive with the same 3 levels repeated over and over. But I find that destroying Death Stars is something that never gets old. I also found that the difficulty increases at the perfect rate, making the whole thing incredibly addictive. So this is easily going to be the first game in this episode going into the essential category. Next up we have Suburban Commando, which came out in 1993, published by Alternative Software and developed by Richard Turner. And considering the main draw for any game based on the awful Hulk Hogan movie would have been to play as the man himself, the fact that they start this game with a smooth but bland Project X knockoff was certainly a bold choice. My advice would be to enter the level code for the second level and skip the opening entirely, as the platform sections are actually quite fun with some excellent graphics. There's nothing groundbreaking or particularly memorable here, but it is playable and quite good fun while it lasts, and it could have been so much worse. Just ignore that opening level. So this is going to go in the good category, I think, and I think I'm going to put this one just below Navy Seals. Next up we have Surf Ninjas, which came out in 1994, developed by Creative Edge and published by Flare. And don't worry if you can't remember the movie of this one, neither can I. And you'll definitely want to forget the game as well. Before it even gets to the title screen when it's loading, this one is forcing you to choose between music or sound effects, which is never a good sign. Basically, it's a clone of IRM's Vigilante, where you continually fight the same looking enemy over and over again until you get bored. Unfortunately, none of the punches or kicks that your character throws ever seem to connect, sometimes even sailing right through their opponent, and the controls are really unresponsive. For some reason, this one was deemed worthy of a CD32 version as well. God knows what they were thinking with that one. So this is definitely in the rubbish category. And I think it's going to go between Red Heat and Last Action Hero. Next up, we have T2 the arcade game, which came out in 1993, developed by Probe Software and published by Virgin Interactive. And unusually for a game developed by Probe, this is an arcade conversion that is about as good as it was ever going to be. This was actually made around the same time that they were converting Mortal Kombat to the Amiga, so maybe they turned over a new leaf at that point. The problem, however, lies with the arcade original itself, which is a fairly bland light gun shooter, enlivened only by the fact that you're shooting your way through waves of T-800s. Levels and boss encounters could definitely do with being shorter than they are, as it all gets repetitive far too quickly. It's definitely a better game if you can get a friend to join you though, but that will require you to bring a second mouse. There are definitely better light gun shooters than this on the Amiga, but this is definitely better than something like Predator 2. I think I am just going to put this one in the recommended category, so it's going to go below the A1200 version of Jurassic Park. Now we come to the Terminator 2 Judgment Day game from Ocean, released in 1991 alongside the movie and developed by LJN. And in many ways, this is the type of game that people think of whenever you say movie license, as it's a collection of game styles, most of which are terrible, with a couple of exceptions. And it's easy to complete the game in less than an hour. It has some nice graphics throughout though, this one. But the only level that I found to be remotely enjoyable was the bike chase through the LA River. If you must play a Terminator game, definitely stick to the arcade conversion instead, rather than play this one. This one is just above the rubbish category. I think I'm going to put this one just above Moonwalker. Next we have the Three Stooges, which came out in 1987, developed by Incredible Technologies and published by Cinemaware and Mirrorsoft. Based on a series of films rather than just one, this may be a collection of mini-games, but it's all presented with the usual flair that you would associate with a Cinemaware title. It's packed with lots of humorous little touches throughout, and the random game selection means that it's got a very high replay value as well. Just don't expect it to last you for ages, but it is very entertaining while you're playing it. So I think I'm going to put this one in the good category. And I think I'm going to put it towards the top. I think I'm going to put this one just below The Spy Who Loved Me. Next we have Total Recall, which came out in 1990, published by Ocean Software, that name again, and developed by Bobby Earl. And yes, the main character in this one looks nothing like Arnold, but apparently that is a side effect of last minute changes to the license, and the developers had to scramble to change it. But this is actually one of the best games to be based on one of his films, certainly on the Amiga. Once you settle into the gameplay loop of the opening level, it's a pretty entertaining platform shooter, and the driving sections that follow them are even more enjoyable. It's never going to win any awards for originality, but I definitely found it to be far more enjoyable than I expected. And I'm going to put this one towards the top of the good category, I think, and I think I'm going to put this one between the two RoboCop games. Next up we have the Untouchables, which came out in 1989, published by Ocean Software yet again, and developed by Special FX. This is a reasonably entertaining action game with great graphics, although unless you can find the adapted version of it, everything is incredibly dull, which was apparently a side effect of converting the game directly from the Atari ST. The crosshair shooting sections are definitely the most enjoyable, as on the platforming sections it's far too easy to completely run out of ammo and end up with a game over message. Like many movie games though, it's all too slight and over far too quickly, but it's definitely above average overall. So this one's another one going in the good category, and I think I'm going to put this one just above Suburban Commando. And to the final game on this list, we have Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Released in 1988, developed by Silent Software and published by Disney. Once again, this is a selection of mini-games, and once again, the selection here vary wildly in quality and difficulty. The driving section that opens the game is simply a test of your reactions, as you have no way of knowing what's about to appear in front of you. The graphics are excellent throughout though, even if they're not quite as good as those in Hair-Raising Havoc. If you're a fan of the film, it's definitely worth playing, but I don't think it's especially memorable. But I don't think it's bad enough for the poor category, so I am going to put this one towards the bottom of the good category, and I think I'm going to put it just above Oliver and Company. So there you go, that's the final 37 games based on movies on the Amiga. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video. If you disagree with where I've placed any of the games in this ranking, please do let me know in the comments where you would have placed them instead. If there are any categories of games that you'd like to see me cover in future episodes of this series, I am also considering branching out into other formats. Let me know what you think about that one as well. So once again, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please make sure you give us a like and subscribe if you have. There is a link to the playlist of all previous episodes that should be coming on screen any minute now. And if you really want to support the channel, please do consider becoming a VIP member, which is only $1.99 a month. And amongst the perks that you get is the fact that you get to watch these episodes earlier than anyone else. So please do take a look at that if you're interested. Until next time, happy retro gaming. Bye for now.